Have you ever observed a situation and your gut tells you, this is unusual, something feels off? As journalists, that instinct drives us to ask questions, even if it takes us a couple of years to get any answers. That's how long it took us to uncover the flaws of a subsidized apartment complex in Kalamazoo. I'm Kristie May, editor at NowKalamazoo, a local, independent, nonprofit news service. I'm here with Jessi Phillips, a reporter for local NPR affiliate, WMUK FM, who led the investigation that became our joint story, titled Nothing But Problems, Confronting the Living Conditions at Fox Ridge. Hi, Jessi.
Hi, Kristie.
Hi. So this investigation, it first came about when 3 social workers came to the NowKalamazoo team. Jessi was there as well. Santia and Katie, who are quoted in the story, plus one woman who asked to remain anonymous. They were worried about babies and mothers living in Fox Ridge apartments because the unsafe living conditions prevented them from doing activities that are crucial to their baby's development, like tummy time, for example. They were dealing with soiled carpets from sewage overflows. The moms were also dealing with mice and rodent infestations, which even made cribs unsafe and forced these parents to make tough decisions, including unsafe sleeping practices, like laying their newborns in bed with them. But no matter who these tenants and social workers reported or complained to, no one had adequate responses, from property management to HUD, which is the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, to Kalamazoo City and county government. Everyone insisted they were doing all they can. Now, if you haven't read the story yet, stop now. Go read it. Go listen to it. There's a link to do so in the description. You'll find documents, photos, everything that we gathered while reporting. But what we're going to talk about today is what it took for us to tell this story. So, Jessi, this was a complex story to report, requiring 2 years of work. Talk about the challenges you face in telling a complete story in this era where we're dominated by the 24-hour news cycle.
I was mostly just working on this story from, April, May-ish until it came out. I think I did 4 spots in between then. So I was mostly just working on this.
Which is a benefit because, before I got to NowKalamazoo, I was on the 24-hour news cycle crunch, and it doesn't give you as much time to be able to be committed to a story and stay with the story until it's thoroughly done. You've got to make it to the next show. You've got to have your story ready by that next show. You don't usually get as much time. In this instance, you were able to be committed. NowKalamazoo, while we have our newsletter, because we don't cover spot news, we were able to stay committed for 2 years. And that can be unusual in a newsroom because you've got to get the stories out. You've got to get your clicks and give the people content. So that was really helpful. But then also, there were multiple things going on while trying to stay committed to this story. But we also had to wait for things like FOIAs and documents to come back, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think people quite know how long it does take. This feels relatively short. We did another series last year that really took several years to complete. So a lot of times these things do involve a lot of waiting, a lot of, going down the wrong path and then backtracking and going down a different one. I have a lot of a lot of interviews that I recorded that I didn't even use. Probably almost as many as I did use, honestly, because maybe it was background information, but it wasn't, imperative to the final story that came out. And yeah, building trust with the sources. I went to most of the meetings that the advocates had after like August or September. So they at least saw me there and knew that I was, keeping up to date with what was going on. And yeah, I have done a few housing stories, but nothing this in depth. So, one of the things about being a general assignment reporter is like I learn as much as possible about a specific topic and then put out the story and then generally move on to something else.
And federally subsidized housing and local regulators, that's complicated.
It's extremely complicated. I don't think I can say I'm even an expert by any means. I'm still learning about how things work as far as HUD rules, vouchers. It's extremely complicated.
That's what I love about being a journalist. We get to just keep learning. We're just professional learners.
It's true, yeah.
And we were, while, waiting for FOIAs, learning, this system, we were holding our breaths because there was this constant push and pull between waiting for all the facts to come, but then also fear that the story might break before we were ready. Things were changing so quickly.
Yeah, it was hard to know when to say it's done, There are still things happening with it now, so we could have waited even. Or we could have gone out, a month or so earlier and not included all of everything that happened after that. So, yeah, it's hard to know, in a story like this that is developing as you're going, when exactly to put it out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, things, even the rules with HUD are changing. The inspection system is changing. The voucher system is changing. So you can learn about it, and then, it's changing all these rules are changing all the time with different laws, different administrations. So these things do take time. Yeah.
Yeah. But the positive of all that time is it gave you time to gain trust, like you were saying earlier, trust with the advocacy collective, the housing advocacy collective, trust with the tenants that you were speaking to, even to get a hold of property management and ownership there, you needed time. But speaking of that trust, how did you earn the confidence of the people at Fox Ridge, many of whom were understandably skeptical of any media involvement?
I think they're kind of at the point where they feel like they have nothing to lose by telling their story. Still, I think it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to, let a reporter into your home and tell them about really difficult things you're going through. I can't imagine how, anxiety producing it would be to, have heard that on the radio if I was one of the tenants and just like wondering which parts I included. And same thing with the advocates. Being a source in a story, I've been wondering lately, like, why people choose to do it, like what they're getting out of it. I think they're doing it because they hope it creates some change, but I can't guarantee that it's going to.
Sometimes I sit back with the story, though, and I'm just like, wow, this person really trusted me with their story, and they didn't have to. And I think sometimes as journalists, we take that for granted. We think people have to tell us information or they have to share their story with us, and they don't have to. They choose to because we earn their trust, we are, earn their respect, and they trust that we're going to do their story justice. We're not going to misrepresent what they're trying to say or what's going on there. So I think that's really big, especially something that you talked about with me. A lot of these tenants that you were working with were women of color, Black women, and you talked about, going in there, and yes, it was friendly and they were kind to you, but you did sense their skepticism of any exploitation, misrepresentation, or even just cultural differences, and you had to work through that.
Yeah, I often, I had thoughts from time to time about whether I was the ideal person to be telling the story or reporting on the story. I am white. I have never lived in subsidized housing.
Mm-hmm.
I do have close family members who have. But, I'm the one I'm the one assigned to do it, so you have to do the best you can. And I really don't think that the tenants or the advocates or really anyone, including me, realized the story would be this long and this extensive. So, I hope that means they feel good about participating. I think there's more of them in their story in there than maybe they thought there would be, if they thought it was going to be just a short piece like the ones that have been out before about Fox Ridge.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone realized quite how in depth we were going to go when we started.
Yeah. But even the way this story started speaks to, NowKalamazoo and WMUK being representations of honest journalism in general, because these were some folks who recognized they felt like they had no one else to turn to, and they came to us and were just like, I feel like you are the right people who are going to tell the story, tell it completely, give it justice, and follow this all the way through. But can you speak to that a little bit, that fine line between I'm going to tell this story and all of its truth, my ethics as a journalist and, the job I have to do here. I'm not here as an advocate, but I am sitting on all of you all's meetings, where you guys did come to me personally. How do you maintain that fine line between, advocacy and a journalist?
Yeah, so I did attend many of the advocacy meetings that happen every other week. And there were moments where I was kind of treated as part of the group, because I'd been researching this on my own as part of the story. Sometimes they would even ask my opinion about something, for example. And I had to be like, no, I can't really tell you what I think you should do. Yeah, there was, I did have to kind of maintain that boundary in a way. And I really do think that the 30 minutes I got to interview the management one-on-one, I do think I approached them with, tough questions, but I really was there to hear their side of the story. And I think that even though they didn't respond to further requests for comment, I hope that even they feel like in that 30 minutes I was listening to them and trying to understand. So trying to understand like how they see it.
Yeah.
So I hope that they also feel that they were fairly represented.
Absolutely. Your genuineness seems most obvious to me as editor with some of the folks like Miss Santia Fowler, who ended up being quoted in the story. She initially came to you wanting to be completely anonymous. And so after spending some time with you and seeing how committed you were to the story, to accuracy and fairness, I recall that moment when we went to one of the meetings, both of us, and she just had a moment where she was like, I'm going to go on record. I'm going to say something. I remember her saying, I'm doing right by God. And so whatever happens to me, I know it's his will and I'm doing what I'm meant to do. So I think that speaks to the genuineness they felt from you to be able to say, you know what, this story some folks need to be named. We're going to have to say what we said and put our names behind it. And so I think that speaks to that genuineness there and the, relationship that you all were able to build, even with you keeping that fine line of I am here as a journalist, I'm not here as an advocate. But speaking of anonymous sources, there were still a couple of anonymous sources in this story, and there's a balance there as well. There's a fine line to toe. So let's talk about our policy when deciding whether to include anonymous voices. It's a last resort, but in instances where there's a threat to someone's life, or in this case, their livelihood, we do make an exception. Same for WMUK, right?
Yeah, I mean, we push, or at least gently push, someone to include their name and hopefully their name and their voice if it's a radio story. Yeah, I think a lot of readers and listeners don't know that we know who they are. We have to prove who they are as much as possible. We're still verifying everything they're saying, even though they are not going on the record with their name. But yeah, we are trying to be as transparent as possible. So we really try to weigh all other options before we decide if we're going to use an anonymous voice in the story, whether the information is key enough or if we can get it anywhere else. And also just maintaining, really checking their reliability.
Yeah, because we did have that conversation when it came to the whistleblower specifically, where we asked ourselves multiple times, even our lawyer who looked at it, we had to take into consideration what intent could this person potentially have with sharing this information with us. Was there any bad blood, or were they coming truly with just, I want to share this information because I know what's going on, not some type of vendetta. So we considered that as well. But ultimately, the information they were privy to in this case, in the case of this story, the local government reps who were present were also convinced to act on this information as well. So we kept having the conversation of like, we know too much now. We can't just leave this out. We can't leave this person out and that information out. And when they provided proof that lined up with what they said, it also lined up with what all the tenants and social workers were saying on record. So it made sense.
Yeah, this is a kind of different situation because they didn't come to us with this information. They came to the city with it. So that in and of itself is kind of news. And since I was there when they gave that information to the city, that's not something we can, not include, right? So, it kind of goes back to the question of like why people are participating in the story to begin with. And when you're creating the story, you kind of get this conflicted feeling of like, wow, I want this story to be as good as possible. So I want people on record. I want them to tell me, tell the reader and the listener where they work so that tells us that they're experts. I want their voice in the story, their specific voice, because it's going to make the story better. But then you think, okay, what impact is this going to have on their lives? This is complicating their lives for my story to be as good as possible. And so you kind of feel some conflict there for sure.
So, Jessi, verification is critical in stories like this one, where it can quickly turn into a he said, she said situation. So what steps did you take to ensure the story was accurate and fair?
We gathered a lot of documentation. We did a lot of FOIA requests for reports from HUD, tenant complaints to the city and county. We tried to give the management enough opportunity to respond. And also the advocates kept a lot of documentation over the years. They had photos, firsthand accounts. So we were able to use a lot of those as well. And the tenants also had photos and documentation too.
And if you don't know, for those of you listening, you also can file a FOIA. That's not just a tool that we have as journalists. You have that tool as a citizen or even as a non-citizen. A Freedom of Information Act request can be submitted to secure public records, and the agency must respond, although they don't have to give you all of the information you request. There are exemptions and such, but that is a tool that is available to you as well.
Yeah, and the time kind of varies. We actually have FOIAs out to federal agencies that haven't come back for years, like the Department of Labor. Just throw them under the bus. But the city actually was very good about getting back FOIA requests, as was HUD actually too. The county tended to move a little slower, and they did try to charge us too, which they can charge you for whatever time it takes for them to find the information for you. So that's why it's helpful to have really specific FOIAs. And sometimes you don't really know even what you are looking for or asking for. So that was what was really helpful about the advocates keeping such good records, because then I could, make my FOIAs a little more specific in terms of time range and what information I was looking for.
Yeah. And this story was a collaboration between NowKalamazoo and WMUK. What was the benefit for you, Jessi, of having two outlets work together?
Well, it was great to have your experience and input along with Sevilla's, and then Ben's as well from NowKalamazoo. I think, you each had sort of a different perspective, and we had a lot of discussions about, what direction to take this in. There were probably so many different ways to tell this story, so we kind of had to, figure that out together as far as what angle we were taking, what we were focusing on. So it was really useful to have more than just me and Sevilla giving our feedback. And as far as I can tell, most people that have talked to me have said they have consumed both stories, so both the print one and the radio ones. They are different. The radio one I think is a little more narrative and scene setting, and the print one has a lot more detailed factual information that's interesting. Also, a lot more of the actual documents and things that we found are included in that story, which we can't do in radio or don't do in radio. So I think, together they kind of tell like an even more nuanced and interesting story.
And what I appreciated is being able to combine both audiences, NowKalamazoo and WMUK, and this story was able to have a wider reach when it came to getting the story in front of people, because we can do it justice as the writers, the reporters of it, but then also we hope that, we're able to do it justice and actually getting it in front of people and making sure that it's actually read. That's the next most important step. And so, NowKalamazoo, for example, has a bigger social media presence than WMUK does, so it was able to reach a wide audience there.
Another thing I wanted to talk about was just how this story is a really good example of why we do need to fund journalism. It would have been very hard for me to do this as a freelancer and work on this for months and months, then only get paid at the end, Also, having that, constant guidance from editors was also really crucial. There were many months of work where there was no content being created. So we needed that time where, I'm a single person. I have bills to pay. We needed that time where no content is being created, but I am making a living and getting paid to do the work. So just another reason. That's why we need to continue to fund this kind of work.
And so what's next? The story isn't over, right, Jessi?
Yeah, things are still happening. The advocacy group is still working on the situation. So we'll have to see, what happens with Fox Ridge in the future. We are still getting a lot of tips from tenants at other subsidized housing properties or other people who want to, reach out about their housing situation, or folks who have lived at or near Fox Ridge before too. So there will definitely be a lot of follow-up stories, I think.
And thanks to our newly established reporting collaboration, supported in part by the Inna Foundation, we'll be able to cover even more stories related to the countywide housing crisis. Be sure to give a listen to WMUK at 102.1 and be sure to subscribe to Now Kalamazoo's daily email newsletter at nowkalamazoo.org for ongoing updates, stories, and more. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.